How many times have we heard someone say, oh, it's only his imagination? Only his imagination. Man's imagination is the man himself. No man has too little imagination, but few men have disciplined their imagination. Imagination is itself indestructible. Therein lies the horror of its misuse. Daily, we pass some stranger on the street and observe him muttering to himself, carrying on an imaginary argument with one not present. He is arguing with vehemence, with fear or with hatred, not realizing that he is setting in motion by his imagination an unpleasant event which he will presently encounter. The world, as imagination sees it, is the real world. Not facts, but figments of the imagination shape our daily lives. It is the exact and literal-minded who live in a fictitious world. Only imagination can restore the Eden from which experience has driven us out. Imagination is the sense by which we perceive the above, the power by which we resolve vision into being. Every stage of man's progress is made by the exercise of the imagination. It is only because men do not perfectly imagine and believe that their results are sometimes uncertain when they might always be perfectly certain. Determined imagination is the beginning of all successful operation. The imagination alone is the means of fulfilling the intention. The man who, at will, can call up whatever image he pleases is, by virtue of the power of his imagination, least of all subject to caprice. The solitary or captive can, by intensity of imagination and feeling, affect myriads, so that he can act through many men and speak through many voices. Let me tell you the story of a very dear friend of mine. At the time, the costume designer of the music hall in New York. She told me one day of her difficulty in working with one of the producers who invariably criticized and rejected her best work unjustly. That he was often rude and seemed deliberately unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I reminded her, as I'm reminding you, that men can only echo to us that which we whisper to them in secret. I had no doubt but that she silently argued with the producer, not in the flesh, but in quiet moments to herself. She confessed that she did just that each morning as she walked to work. I asked her to change her attitude toward him, to assume that he was congratulating her on her fine designs, and she, in turn, was thanking him for his praise and kindness. This young designer took my advice, and as she walked to the theater, she imagined a perfect relationship with the producer, praising her work, and she, in turn, responding with gratitude for his appreciation. This she did morning after morning, and in a very short while she discovered for herself that her own attitude determined the scenery of her existence. The behavior of the producer completely reversed itself. He became the most pleasant professional employer she had encountered. His behavior merely echoed the changes that she had whispered within herself. What she did was by the power of imagination. Her fantasy led his, and she herself dictated to him the discourse they eventually had together. At the time, she was seemingly walking alone. Let us set ourselves, here and now, a daily exercise of controlling and disciplining our imagination. What finer beginning than to imagine better than the best we know for a friend? There's no coal of character so dead that it will not go and flame if but slightly turned. Don't blame, only resolve. Life, like music, can by a new setting turn all its discords into harmony. Represent your friend to yourself as already expressing that which he desires to be. Let us know that with whatever attitude we approach another, A similar attitude approaches us. How can we do this? Do what my friend did. To establish rapport, call your friend mentally. Focus your attention on him and mentally call his name, just as you would to attract his attention were you to see him on the street. Imagine that he has answered. Mentally hear his voice. Imagine that he is telling you of the great good you have desired for him. You in turn tell him of your joy in witnessing his good fortune. Having mentally heard that which you wanted to hear, having thrilled to the news heard, go about your daily tasks. Your imagined conversation must awaken what it affirms. The acceptance of the end wills the means, and the wisest reflection could not devise more effective means than those which are willed by the acceptance of the end. However, your conversation with your friend must be in a manner which does not express the slightest doubt as to the truth of what you imagine that you hear him say. If you do not control your imagination, you will find that you are hearing and saying all that you formerly heard and saying. We are creatures of habit.